Okay. So episode 2, I guess, of what? The Hark podcast.
That's right.
Or
We'll label it Hark, semaglutide or semaglutide.
Yeah.
How are you saying it?
Semaglutide is how I would say it.
Semaglutide.
The title I wrote in my notes for this episode was GLP1 agonists and weight loss pharmacotherapy.
I love that.
So that's, definitely the drug researcher in me being like, let's treat this as a work project.
I'm hoping you can explain a bit more of that to me. Because what I've found is GLP1 is a hormone that is emitted from the intestines and travels to different areas. Pancreas, stomach, brain.
Yeah.
These important areas. And it's natural. It's a natural hormone. And, when it goes to your brain, it's saying, I'm full. When it goes to other areas, it says, insulin up.
Yeah.
Thus creating the effect of, I don't want to eat anymore. Appetite is satisfied. And my understanding is semaglutide or semaglutide is something that sort of tricks the body into thinking like, I'm getting a similar signal. Like,
yeah.
I'm full.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good breakdown. I think there's one piece that I came across which was new to me, but there's this other molecule called glucagon. Glucagon's what signals your body to upregulate blood sugar. And so these GLP-1 receptor agonists will decrease the release of glucagon also. So that's why there's this specific effect for diabetes, type 2 diabetes in specific, where it's like a blood sugar insulin problem. There's the insulin effects of these drugs, and then there's also the direct blood sugar effects by modifying glucagon. I think what you said about the brain is especially interesting. And the more I read about this class of drugs, the more I'm convinced that they're more of a brain drug than a body drug. I think that makes the most sense. And so, I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later, but there's this combined effect of feeling full, longer satiety, and delayed gastric emptying. And I think that last piece is pretty important too. So it's this combinatorial effect that the drug is having by making you feel full, that's effects in the brain, but also causing your brain to signal your stomach to keep contents for longer. And so you actually feel full for longer because your stomach is staying full for longer, which is super interesting. But so a little bit more on sort of how these things work. Yeah, so it's a receptor agonist, and what that means is that these GLP-1 drugs will bind the receptor for GLP-1, the hormone. GLP-1 is a naturally occurring molecule in the body, which is associated with a bunch of these effects that we've just mentioned. And so these GLP-1 receptor agonists bind the receptor for that hormone. So the first generation of GLP-1 drugs, I forget the name of this drug. I have it written here somewhere in my notes. This drug, I think, was FDA approved in the early 2000s. I saw a GPT note on it being harvested from, it's a natural product harvested from some lizard, which was a little disturbing. I don't know if that's true or not. I didn't fact check it.
Take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Let me find this real fast. Exenatide. So exenatide had some publications in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I think this is an AstraZeneca drug. I could be wrong about that, but it was withdrawn from market due to strategic termination. So they decided it didn't have the commercial opportunity that it needed to have to be sustainable in the market.
Interesting to look at like how these drugs came to market, because right now, like in the US, they're being prescribed to people with like obesity, as opposed to type 2 diabetes, which is like, I think that, I don't know if that was the primary purpose of the drug development. I forget exactly what it was first designed for, but I know that it was sort of first opened up to the type 2 diabetes patients because it was proven to be super effective for them.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the drawback, and I don't know if it's still the case now, but when some of these like obesity patients started grabbing this drug as well, there's like a supply and demand issue. So some of the diabetes patients were having trouble getting the drug. That was pretty helpful for them to like survive versus like improve quality of life type thing.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the nature of the insurance aspects, right? Because it sort of broadly approved for insurance coverage for treatment of type 2 diabetes, but for general weight loss, you got to pay for all that out of pocket. Yeah, I think the supply and demand issue is really interesting too. So I mean, South Park did an episode on Ozempic, and one big piece of that South Park episode was the effects of what are known as compounding pharmacies. And I've got some people in my life on these drugs, and I talked to one of them recently. She's on tirzepatide now, I believe, but she doesn't have the diabetes condition, so she's taking these drugs for weight loss, and she's sourcing her drug product from a compounding pharmacy. And so I think the limitation in supply isn't limitation in manufacturing of the bulk pharmaceutical ingredient, the API, which is what you would hear it called in the field, active pharmaceutical ingredient. I think it's more about the injector. This is my assumption, because you have a take-home injector that requires manufacturing itself, and then there's all this packaging and branding and stuff that has to happen. And so I think the bulk drug actually isn't in short supply. I think it's everything between the bulk drug and the delivery of that drug to patients that is limiting, because you can get these drugs at compounding pharmacies for, I think, a lot cheaper, and I think it's cheaper. I don't know that to be true.
Yeah,
but more reliably as well. I don't think compounding pharmacies have the same issue with supply. I think they buy in bulk from direct pharmaceutical manufacturers, and then they formulate themselves. So the compounding pharmacy will take these bulk APIs and essentially complete the last step of the preparation and make it a product for direct to consumer sale.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think the person I know that's on it isn't on like the name brand Ozempic, but is on, I don't know, it has, I guess, a bit more of a unlabeled scientific name from their perspective. It's just like very basically what they could get their hands on.
Yeah. Interesting. There's a few GLP1 receptor agonists on the market. There's Ozempic and Wegovy, which I think are both semaglutide, just marketed to either diabetes or weight loss patients, I think.
Yeah, I think the difference between those two, if I'm recalling correctly, is Ozempic is an injectable, like a weekly injectable, and Wegovy might be a pill.
I think there was one pill on the market. I don't remember if it was Wegovy, but that's an interesting thought. So I didn't look into this. I would have loved to, but people don't prefer injectables, even once weekly injectables. People will take a pill every morning before they've got to inject themselves once a week, even if it's a relatively straightforward process.
Yeah.
So I mean, the thinking in the field is the first company that can make a really effective orally bioavailable GLP-1 receptor agonist is just going to undercut the whole industry and kind of take over. And I think there's something like that available now, but there's some caveats there. And the reason that I think that there must be caveats is because it hasn't taken over yet. Like, I'm not hearing about people taking weight loss pills yet, aside from old school, like, I forget the name of the drugs. There's other weight loss drugs in the market. I think phentermine's an old school one. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm curious about what's going on there. There's some orally bioavailable pill out there, I think, but I'm not sure how effective it is or what the deal is.
Yeah, I've heard that the injectable is more effective than what's available orally currently. I don't know what goes into why an injectable would be more effective than oral, but I guess you can target where you want to put that thing in. I don't know.
Yeah.
With someone not in the field, I'm like, How does that make a difference in like?
Yeah, it's all about absorption. I think it's really just absorption. Can you get the drug in the bloodstream, and will it survive first pass to the liver? Everything you eat goes straight through the liver before it gets to the rest of circulation. And so a big challenge for making orally bioavailable drugs is, first of all, crossing the intestines, getting in the body, and secondly, surviving the liver before it reaches systemic circulation. So if you inject, you're just like, I don't need to worry about the stomach. I don't need to worry about the liver or first pass through the liver. We can just sort of go straight to the bloodstream, or there's some absorption process to go from the dermal layer into the bloodstream. That's like way easier to do. And even so, like in the field of small molecules, the standard is orally bioavailable drugs, pills, really. So tirzepatide, semaglutide, all of these GLP1 receptor agonists are biologics, right? They're therapeutic proteins. They're not small molecules. Therapeutic proteins are way harder to get into pill form. They're just very hard to get those through the gut and through the liver. But even in the case of small molecules, some of the newer classes of small molecules, the field is trying to consider, are subcutaneous injectables a good first step? If we have a novel cancer therapy, and the only thing keeping it out of the market is that we can't put it in a pill, can we put this in an injector? And so these weight loss drugs are kind of carving a path for that. I think. I don't know if it'll take, but for the reasons I mentioned earlier, the first person to get these things into pills is going to just own that piece of the market, no matter if they're already in an injectable format or not. But yeah, I think that's just one interesting side effect of having such a popular and broadly prescribed injectable. It's like, okay, maybe there's not as much resistance to injectables as we may have thought as a field. Maybe we can grow in a way that's a little bit more considerate of alternate dosing routes, but that's a little bit tangential.
Yeah, I think I've also heard that just from like a regulation perspective, the means for prescribing these drugs for obesity is unique in the respect that it's not something that's happening in the EU. It's something specific to the US, and from what I've heard, like the EU is typically a bit more liberal in that regard. Like they're more willing to let somebody take a drug before it might get FDA approval in the US. And I almost think that speaks to like a US specific problem. Like there's a lot of conversation surrounding how Americans are just larger in general, and obesity is a bigger problem in the US.
Yeah.
And maybe some of that's driven by what we're funding. Like there's definitely been direct funding to soda companies and stuff like that in the US that is like going to just plump up the population, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like there is an incentive to make this drug available to the public earlier than other nations might, even though we're typically laggards in that regard.
Yeah, I think you're hinting at something which I find really fascinating, and it connects a few of these concepts. So you discussed about effects on the brain earlier, and so it's sort of known that when people are on these drugs, they don't necessarily need to modify their lifestyle in a way that feels difficult. They can just sort of continue with normal eating habits, at least to a degree that feels filling. Mm-hmm. They don't have to really change their food choices or exercise preferences. They can keep eating the foods they like, although I think they probably eat less of those foods, right, because of the drugs.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise me at all if the people lobbying insurance companies did have a vested interest in keeping junk food available, right? So like if people can overcome obesity and not have to yield junk food, maybe they consume less of it, but they still consume it. That's a much better opportunity for these big junk food companies.
Yeah, you're doubling the spending. Like they're spending on junk food and
anti-junk food
drugs, which makes for an interesting solution. What you can eat on these drugs is also sort of interesting.
Yeah, like, this is where I haven't done much research.
What I've heard is from a first person account, their provider was giving them very specific information on like what they should eat, and like the first week or so was almost exclusively protein.
Wow. Okay.
And like entering ketosis on the drug, which seems interesting. I hadn't heard that elsewhere. And then after a little bit, they started to be able to introduce like a couple of vegetables into the diet. So it was very like severe sounding dieting.
Yeah, wow.
And from the RP podcast, one of the things that they were suggesting is like people who are fast eaters can get into trouble on this drug. They were saying like if you eat a very calorically dense food, something with a lot of fat, let's say like a cheeseburger or something, and you down that thing, you shovel it in before, you know, your brain can catch up and say, oh, I'm full.
Yeah.
You can be sick for like hours.
Really?
Because you're like, oh, I've consumed way more than I should have. And it's, you know, the drug is unnatural in that way where like we're pretty good at like telling ourselves stop eating because you're going to get sick because that's sort of natural and you've learned that for however long you've lived. You're like, this is when I stop. But when you start taking the drug and you eat like calorically dense food, you can like kind of get yourself in a pickle for like hours of just discomfort. It was like what they were saying. It's like they definitely were like, yeah, let's eat some junk food. And like I think some of the people that are on it might move away from that just because either that or they're slower eaters and won't have an issue. They'll just have like half a burger or something and be like, I'm good, I'm full now.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a pretty unique side effect of the drug is like if you're a quick eater, you can have troubles with the drug because like the signaling's only happening so fast, and even in a normal person, like I don't know, there's just less of a threshold for you to get full, so you can hit that quicker and then also exceed it quicker.
Yeah, you hit your ceiling with a meal that previously wouldn't even have been filling probably.
Yeah,
and you do it so quickly that you don't realize you've, from your brain's perspective, totally overeaten.
Yeah.
I have a feeling maybe you make that mistake once or twice and you're like, you readjust your expectations of what a filling meal is pretty rapidly. That's really interesting. Yeah, and then there's this delayed gastric emptying effect. So you have what feels like way too much food in your stomach, and then it just sits there for hours because your brain won't let it go.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing their perspective because one of the guys that was talking was eating 3,500 to 37 calories pre-hopping on the drug, and after getting on the drug, they were sub 2,000 calories for like a large male.
Yeah,
which seems interesting to go through. I mean, these guys are like bodybuilders, so there's intention to cutting weight, whether that be a healthy choice or not, because they're going from like 5% to 4% or something. Yeah. So a lot of their conversation was circling around when you're on this drug, it's not only going to cut fat, but it's going to just destroy muscle content that you have if you're not actively working out. Like you're eating fewer calories, you're not going to be putting on muscle as well, just because there's less availability there, and you're losing weight, so it's coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
So they were sort of stressing the main two things they were hammering home while they were on it were saying like you should be working out regularly to continue to build muscle mass or maintain muscle mass, especially if you're older. Like your capability to build muscle is, it's just not as good as when you're young.
It's a bone density thing too, right?
Yeah, and I think there's definitely some concern there because I think a lot of older, like much older individuals get into trouble with the lack of muscle or bone density, and how they're sort of integrating it into their platform is like they have like basically like meal reminders, like scheduled eating times. Because it's very easy to miss meals on that drug and like really undereat.
Wow.
It was a very interesting perspective to hear a nutrition company do a podcast on the drug, having had them take it.
Yeah.
And say like this is our impression of it, and I'm being a big fan.
They liked it
of the drug. Yeah, they were definitely making it sound like a wonder drug. Like there's like no real shortcoming of taking the drug. But if I'm a bodybuilder and I'm like getting ready for a show, I guess I could see that. Like I think like the founder of that company is so big he probably has a hard time like wiping his butthole. You know.
So these are
if he can reach
enhanced athletes. These are like steroid enhanced athletes.
Definitely, yeah. They've dabbled in
the dark arts
already, so they saw another opportunity and said, yeah, sure. Like,
yeah,
this sounds like a great way to look good and cut that weight that was being stubborn before.
That's funny. Yeah. I guess I'm less surprised about the overwhelmingly positive response then. I mean, like if you're kind of willing to, take that enhancement.
Yeah, you're like, oh well, what I was on before that's known huge drawbacks. So I'll pop on here and we don't know too many risks right now, but I think what I've read as far as risks of taking it is like, or what they'll mention, maybe even on the box of Ozempic, I'm not sure, is like, I think there's a risk of thyroid cancer.
Seen a little bit of that.
Taking the drug. I think folks that were taking it during like clinical trials or something like while the drug is being a bit more measured, had a higher rate of pancreatitis.
Inflammation.
But I don't know if it was like, really like it was a very small increase in that. So I don't know if that's a deal. But I mean, the drug is going to send that, signaling to the pancreas. That's one of the, main proponents that's hitting it. That's good and bad for some folks, I feel like.
Yeah.
Because the main effect for some is like, let's hit the brain and say we're full.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, it was tough to find things that have been like really proven to say like this is a drawback of the drug. And I think part of that is because it does feel fairly new. Like I got a little confused by that because I was thinking of like the marketing for Ozempic almost feels nostalgic for me. I don't know if you feel the same way, where there's that old 70s song, the "It's Magic," that sort of jingle. And for some reason, I feel like I've been hearing that since my childhood. But I think they aired that, like they first put on that marketing campaign like 5 years ago. Like
Yeah. I think around 2020.
It was pretty new. But I was like, I feel like when I was a kid, I was watching this commercial.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I've really purged commercials from my life in a huge way. So
that's my thing. It's like I haven't watched a commercial since I was a kid. Yeah, and I know that jingle. How do I know that jingle?
It's been around for a little bit.
It's because it's a 50-year-old song that they mutated.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there was one other. I don't know if I'd call this a side effect. This was from an NPR broadcast a couple days ago where one of the reporters was mentioning like an increased incidence in pregnancy for people on the drug. And they associated that with potential reduction in effects of birth control medication. And so I didn't look into this specifically. I think there's a ton of confounding factors, complicating factors there. I'm not necessarily even trying to suggest that the drug limits the effectiveness of birth control, but it was an interesting stance that they were sort of trying to nucleate conversation from on this NPR broadcast. But I mean, even just one of those confounding factors is like you lose 20 pounds. Maybe you feel like having sex more often. Maybe 20 pounds ago you weren't, getting it on as regularly. So I don't know. There's a lot of ways to take that, but yeah, as far as side effects go, the only other one I've been curious about is nausea. And so this is the really difficult thing to suss out in preclinical studies. So like before these drugs get into humans, you can show remarkable weight loss in rodents, like in rats or in mice. You can show remarkable weight loss just by making them feel sick every day. They'll just stop eating if you make them nauseous. That's a remarkably effective way to maintain weight control. And you don't get to ask a mouse if it's nauseous, right? I mean, it's pretty hard to suss that out, or at least it can be without a really dedicated and considerate trial design. But that's one thing I'd be interested to know. I haven't heard much of patients that I know of nausea. It doesn't seem like a big issue, but it wouldn't surprise me if it were. I don't know if you've heard much about it.
I definitely heard about nausea. I think like part of what they were saying about eating like super calorically dense foods, that's how you can sort of land yourself in a nauseous state.
I see.
Or just, yeah, generally feeling pretty like uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely something I've heard quite a bit. But I think if you can, sort of adapt the way you eat to avoid nausea and lose weight, then I think a lot of people would find that pretty attractive. Like, just figure out how to avoid the nausea and take the drug.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does feel like the drug is suppressing a lot of things, like making you want less. Like, one of the benefits of the drug is craving reducer. The person I know that's taking it is saying like they're just really not interested in, or they're not craving like caffeine as much anymore, which is a sort of an interesting side effect. But I've also heard, and this honestly sounds like a great trade-off, even if there is side effects for these people. Is like, I've heard some people saying that like for alcoholics, like they're just not craving alcohol as much. That could be a pretty crazy avenue for this drug to go.
Yeah, totally. So there's been even some brain imaging done on people that are on either placebo or GLP1 type drugs. So this is a study in this note here, which was done on exenatide, which is sort of not the perfect representation, because this is the older drug that was pulled. But what they were able to show in this study was that when they showed either obese or diabetic patients pictures of food, and they normalized this to pictures of non-food, that when they were on exenatide, there were specific areas of the brain that were way less activated, statistically significantly less activated. And so there is a direct effect from the brain here. And I think the sort of one sentence conclusion to that is that these drugs reduce the rewarding effects of food. So there's this sort of dopamine response or reward response you might get from like a picture of a cookie or something. And if you have a food addiction issue, that's going to be a really big response. That's your addiction. And if that signal is reduced, then I think that's not just a food thing. Like, if the thing you are addicted to is associated with that reward that you're giving yourself that you're addicted to, reducing activation in that part of the brain seems like a very, very strong signal away from that thing. So that's super fascinating. And I think that effect is probably one of the reasons that these drugs are so darn effective. I think it's this, like, especially for obese patients, I really think it's the reward system of the brain being tuned down a little bit to reduce food intake or food desire even. I'd be really curious. Like, I don't think this is possible, but if you could determine how much of the effectiveness of these drugs were due to insulin secretion, glucagon inhibition versus brain effects, sort of effects on how you perceive food.
Yeah.
I would bet, I don't think this is a possible thing to suss apart, but I would bet that the brain effects are the majority of the effectiveness in the response. That makes the most sense to me. And that's really fascinating. We don't have a lot of instances that I'm aware of where you can change someone's perception about a thing and have that be a therapeutic.
Yeah. That's pretty, that's a black box for me. Like, just understanding how the brain works.
Yeah, for most people.
That's pretty tough. And it makes me unsure of, like, how do the users of this drug proceed, right? Like, you're on the drug, you lose a bunch of weight, and at some point you're eating maintenance calories, and you hit your new weight that you've landed on. I think that's probably going to be dependent on the dosage that you're given. Because when you're given these drugs, it's sort of up to your doctor to say, this is how much you should be taking. And I think a lot of people start on like a 0.5 milligram. But you can go up to like 2.5 or something like that. And like, let's say you get down to whatever weight it is you're seeking. How does it look after that? Do you just have to stay on the drug, or do you come off, and how does that look like? I haven't heard too many accounts that have like gotten to that point where they're like, oh, I've hit the weight I desired. Now what? I think I've heard of some folks that like come off the drug and they will gain it right back because like you've been eating like that for X number of years, and the brain starts to remember once it stops getting that signaling. So it seems a little tricky. Like either it's a lifestyle drug that you're just gonna take all the time, or maybe there's a means for like weaning yourself off of it in a way that lets you start living like a non-medication lifestyle again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that looks like.
Yeah, I really like this aspect of the question. I mean, of the whole topic. I think this is a really important question. There's a few thoughts here. I think the first one is like thinking about some pharma executive with a monocle and a top hat, just like wringing his hands like, well, I'm going to keep these guys drugged forever because they're going to need this drug to stay healthy. I hope that's not the case for most people. And I think without specific change in lifestyle, that probably will be the case for a lot of people. But, I mean, an adult, my adult life has been filled with a lot of fitness and exercise-related activity. And something that I've always maintained is that results are the best motivator. And so I think there's a real opportunity for people who are just starting these drugs to combine the effects of the drugs with a super boost from change in lifestyle at the same time. And so they will see results. If you were to do nothing with your lifestyle, you would see results. Yeah. But being able to own a chunk of those results by doing things like changing diet or doing some simple exercise, I think could really start to trigger the reward effect from exercise itself. And maybe that's modulated because of the drugs at first. But just building those habits and putting it in your mind that you can own a chunk of whatever results you're getting because of your lifestyle change will not only improve the rate of weight loss or whatever health metric you're interested in improvement, but also lend itself to getting off the drug and staying off the drug in the long term. And so, I mean, like that's what I've recommended to the people that I know taking the thing. It's like, okay, let's use this as like a little nitrous in the gas tank or however cars work to be like, we're going to get a super acceleration right now. Yeah, but you need to be the one pushing the pedal and like really pushing your lifestyle forward to see if you can take advantage of this to its fullest with the intention of getting off the drug eventually. Unfortunately, I don't think that's feasible for a lot of people. Those habits are really hard to build. But being able to sort of tag your activity with guaranteed results, borderline guaranteed results, I think is a really powerful strategy. So that's my hope. I hope that people's doctors are recommending the same thing. What you mentioned about having a real strict diet as you start the drug, I think is really smart. If people, I don't know if that's necessary, to be totally honest. I don't know if that's really a necessary thing, but it is the perfect time to be like, this is going to work if you do these things to your diet in the short term, and then we can tune it back as you achieve maintenance or sort of cruising altitude. But people will take the advice especially seriously if they're about to start this drug, which they have no idea how it works, and they know that they need to just sort of abide by the rules in order for it to work. So there's some opportunity there. I hope that people get that advice from the doctors. I'm sure they do, but people who are obese have been told their whole lives, for as long as they're obese life, to exercise and eat less, and those are hard things to change. So I don't know. I think a lot of people will be on the drugs forever. That's the unfortunate thing. Yeah. And then the other piece of that is like, as with any new medication, any new activity, like these longitudinal studies that inform on potential downstream effects, decades into the future, you don't get that data for decades. That's sort of the nature of the beast. And so, maybe it's fine if you're on the drug for a year, but what about 20 years? People are taking this drug in their 50s and 40s even, probably younger for folks that really need it. Yeah. Can you be on this type of drug for a long, long time without severe effects?
Yeah, that's tough, especially if it's, interacting with the brain. That's
exactly.
Tough part of the body to work with. Like, you could be unknowingly trading one thing for another.
And the brain is plastic. The brain rewrites itself all the time. So it's really hard to say how it'll adapt to this new neurochemical situation. I don't know. That's something
That was a nice neuro term from you. Plastic.
Yeah, well, there's
Neuroplasticity.
there's a good book on neuroplasticity that my buddy Dan recommended to me a while back, and he got a lot out of that. And I didn't finish it, but I appreciated the message.
Yeah,
I think the name of the book was something like "The Brain That Writes Itself," or I might have.
You can change it. It's just a big ball of fat, and and
Well,
you're trying to cut some fat.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd put it that way.
Yeah, maybe that's not how you sell the drug, but
yeah. So there's one extra piece of this whole puzzle that tirzepatide takes advantage of, and that a new drug, which is in clinical trials, is taking advantage of. That drug is called. Oh my gosh, I should know. This is an Amgen drug. I didn't work on it. I don't have specific insider advice about this thing, obviously. It's called maridebart cafraglutide, which is also known as Maritide for short. But tirzepatide and Maritide, well, I wrote it right here. They both act on the GLP1 receptor. They're both agonists of the GLP1 receptor, which is what semaglutide is. But in addition, they bind something called GIPR, and GIPR stands for glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide. So this is a protein which I think we need to do a lot more research around. And the reason I would say that, I think, is summarized nicely in the conclusion of this paper, which was published in 2021 by John Campbell. John Campbell has a YouTube video, which I think was put on by Drug Hunter, which is this big sort of pharma news organization, for lack of a better term, where he talks about this class of drugs. But anyway, the conclusion of this journal article is, there's substantial evidence to support that GIPR agonism and antagonism can positively impact body weight. So that's a loaded statement. So we're talking about GIPR, the glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide receptor. It's just another protein receptor that's related to the signaling pathway. And what he's saying in this first sentence is that agonism and antagonism can positively impact body weight. So we have this protein, which we know is associated with body weight changes. We aren't sure if we should stop its function or increase its function to improve body weight changes. Both seem to do the job. And so that's what I think is really interesting. And the reason I mentioned tirzepatide and Maritide or maridebart cafraglutide is that tirzepatide is a GIPR antagonist and Maritide is a GIPR agonist. So they have opposite effects on the same protein. Both of them have the GLP1 receptor agonism. But for the secondary protein, they have opposite effects. And so there's some weird differentiation happening here.
As an outsider, my thought would be that protein receptor's not at play here. Like, it sounds like these drugs are doing something different that we're not identifying, would be my impression. But I don't really work in that space. But it is an interesting finding.
So I'll continue. There's a little bit more info in this conclusion, which might help you, form an opinion here. But to continue, the longstanding theory that GIP, glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, drives weight gain is exclusively derived from loss-of-function studies with no evidence to support that GIPR agonisms increase adipodicity or body weight. So there was loss-of-function studies, which are supposed to mimic antagonism studies. And those were reported to drive weight gain. So the conclusion, historically, some of the original literature suggested that GIPR loss of function drives weight gain. But loss of function is not the same as antagonism. There's some differences there, and those are referenced in later in this conclusion. And so he mentions, let me find it here. He mentions there's insufficient evidence to reconcile the paradoxical observations that both GIPR agonism and antagonism can reduce body weight. However, two independent hypotheses centered on GIPR antagonism are presented based on new data. So there are a couple hypothetical mechanisms in which antagonism may not be as clear as a weight gain driver, which was what the initial studies suggested. And so the first discusses compensatory relationships between incretin receptors and how antagonism of GIPR may enhance GLP-1 receptor activity. And so the thinking there is that if you antagonize GIPR, or maybe you have a loss of function with GIPR, there may exist a compensatory relationship. So antagonizing the protein may cause the body to upregulate GLP-1 receptor activity, which would drive weight gain. So it's not that GIPR antagonism drives weight gain. It's this compensatory mechanism that drives weight gain. And that compensatory mechanism is GLP-1 receptor activity, which is related to semaglutide. And so the second discusses how chronic GIPR agonism may produce desensitization and ultimately loss of GIPR activity that mimics antagonism. So it's a really complicated piece here. So maybe we can try and summarize on the fly, but the two hypotheses are that GIPR antagonism enhances GLP-1 receptor activity. So this is contrary to the initial evidence, right? Because we think that GLP-1 receptor activity increasing will yield weight loss, even though the loss of function studies with GIPR loss of function stuff indicate a weight gain. And then the second thing is that chronic GIPR agonism, increasing activity of this protein, may produce desensitization and ultimately loss of GIPR activity that mimics antagonism. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, no matter which way you spin it. Tirzepatide is a GIPR antagonist. I think I mentioned that already. And maritide is a GIPR agonist. So it'll be really interesting to see how these two drugs compare in the clinic. And tirzepatide's already on the market, but we don't yet have public data for maritide. But
I think Ozempic's an agonist, right?
So Ozempic is an agonist of GLP-1. So this is the original protein. Tirzepatide is an agonist of GLP-1 and an antagonist of GIPR. So there's two different proteins, the bispecific. Gotcha. And so it's this bispecific behavior that I think has the potential to really differentiate some of these newer drugs. Based on this conclusion, it seems like tirzepatide may have got it backward. That antagonism may be, not the best way to drive weight loss because of the desensitization. But we'll see. Maritide's a GIPR agonist and a GLP-1 receptor agonist. So dual agonist activity versus agonist antagonist activity. We'll see how that data shakes out. I think that'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's also a lot more research going on around GIPR right before GLP-1 receptor agonists became the hot thing. So people are now refocusing on that piece of the puzzle, and we'll see what happens. There's a lot of optimism at Amgen around maritide. People are very optimistic about this drug. And a piece of that goes back to the monocled, top-hatted, hand-wringing executive. Because, Ozempic is single-handedly floating the boat for who put that drug on the market. I forget.
Celebrities,
is that what I said? Yeah. I forget who manufactured it, but
they popularized it, I feel like.
Yeah. But having a successful obesity drug, it's like the biggest market you could ever hope for. The commercial opportunity is enormous. There's the potential that you'll keep people on drugs for a long time. For a business model, this is kind of a bullseye. You can't ask for much more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see. More to come in that regard. I think it would not surprise me if we saw an even more effective version of these drugs with the advent of maritide.
I think one other side effect that I've heard about these drugs is, and which really doesn't come as a surprise, is people are sleepy.
Sleepy.
Like you're just eating fewer calories.
Yeah.
Less energy. But it brings about a pro. By that same logic, people are sleeping amazing. Like people that haven't been able to sleep through the night are just snoozing on this drug.
Wow.
Like folks with sleep apnea, gone.
You lose weight, no more suffocation issues, and you sleep through the night.
Which is sort of funny. I think I've also heard like, some people are just able to like sort of think a little better, like some clarity in the brain, and the opposite as well.
Cloudy thoughts.
Just sort of like like a little less brain power to chew through, a little less energy to leverage. But I thought that was pretty interesting as well. It's like folks are getting better sleep on this drug, but are also sleepier. If you eat less, you're just going to have less energy to do things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, that's kind of leads into one other thing that I didn't research, but I think is somewhat relevant here, and that's the prevalence of nicotine pouches. Nicotine's got a bad rap because of its association with tobacco, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of the negative health consequences associated with tobacco, but I'm not convinced that nicotine alone has as many downsides. And I know it'll just get you buzzing. People love this stuff because it gets you up and it keeps you up. So I wonder if there's like you could really double down with a nicotine pouch and an Ozempic jab.
Yeah, maybe.
And then
that's an anxiety reducer right there.
You're just vibrating while eating less.
Yeah.
Your non-exercise activity thermogenesis would skyrocket.
Apparently, my grandmother was on fen-phen.
Which
is an old drug, and my mother described that drug as if she was on speed.
Yeah, I've heard this.
Like she wasn't hungry at all because she was just too busy cleaning the house.
Oh my gosh.
At crazy rates.
Yeah, that's so crazy. I've heard similar stories from other people.
But
with those drugs.
It feels interesting that these drugs sort of work in kind of the opposite way. Like your brain's not like on overdrive to like it's not acting like cocaine to keep you from eating. Like instead, you're a little more sluggish. Like you're a little tired because you're eating less.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's appetite suppressant, but in a completely different mechanism.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how these drugs change. I think it's tricky to understand. Like if you're a doctor, right? There's still some subjectivity to who you're going to prescribe this to, right? Like it's big enough now that you're going to have patients coming in and saying, "I'm interested to get on this drug," and how do you respond? Like, what's your criteria to put someone on it? I think there's some guardrails. I would hope are probably in place for like if you're a minor. Like I don't know if they're really prescribing this drug to minors yet. But also, I mean, there's the opposite problem that probably fewer people are having is just you're anorexic and you want to get on an anorectic. You know, like you want to cut some more weight.
You maybe have a body image problem and you're.
So I do feel like at some point, like the doctors prescribing are sort of having to make their own judgment call on like, this person should pop on it or this person shouldn't. Like, how do you make that decision?
Yeah, and how do you deal with people that are just going to other doctors who are a little more prescription happy? I mean, and then the other piece of this is like, how can the insurance companies possibly float the bill for obesity-related medication when the prescription guidelines aren't established, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there'd have to be, this isn't the case yet, but in the future for insurance that covers an obesity drug, there'd have to be some metric for obesity. And I'm not convinced that I don't think they would go with BMI. I think insurance companies are too conservative to be like, oh yeah, let's just rely on this metric that we know doesn't really work for body fat.
Yeah. I don't know what a better metric would be.
Probably body fat percentage, if I had to guess. Or I don't know.
Yeah.
If it's not diabetes markers, it's got to be, whatever predictors of cardiovascular disease are. I guess my mind goes to body fat percent, but I don't know. And then what are they going to do? Just hand you like one of those little electrical impedance Game Boys and take that measurement, or do they standardize that measurement process somehow?
Yeah. It would be interesting how that would shake out if there is an audience of like alcoholics that want to hop on the drug just to reduce craving.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Then it's like, as an insurance provider, is that something you're going to facilitate? It's tricky.
It's super tricky. Yeah, I think it's no surprise to me that these drugs are so heavily prescribed in America before they are abroad. We know Americans foot the bill for a lot of pharmaceutical research. Because of how the way insurance works in this country, but it seems like this could be a real tough weight to bear on the insurance industry for Americans. I don't know. I don't really see a clear path forward to them covering obesity medication, which is a shame because that's like the most obvious preventative medicine I could think of. Especially when they can just say diet and exercise. You can treat this on your own. We're not going to help you until you're actually sick.
Yeah. It's tricky.
It's tricky. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe Zins will save the day. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just kidding. I've seen no data about Zin and weight loss or nicotine and weight loss, but that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I guess the nicotine topic was driven by a mention of Zins on the Mark and Ben podcast, Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz podcast, which I'm just really enjoying lately. But they were
shout outs to them.
Yeah, shout out. Yeah, as if they need shout out. Them and their hundreds of millions. And they were talking. They put nicotine in the context of like the switch from alcohol to tea and coffee, and everyone got on coffee and caffeinated tea, and then body weight went down, productivity went up.
Yeah.
Why don't we add nicotine to this mix and really just dump some sugar in the gas tank?
There we go. Yeah.
But I don't know. It's not something I'll be trying anytime soon, anyway.
Yeah. So that's your main means of getting nicotine without tobacco.
Yeah, that's what the Zins pouches are.
Gotcha.
They're just, orally absorbed nicotine. That's what it is. Or I guess there's probably patches too, but that's the one you see everywhere, or at least I'm seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, and I imagine people are addicted to both nicotine and tobacco. Like if you're taking that route, you might still have cravings for like, I don't know, a cigar, like a tobacco type cigar.
Yeah, maybe.
Or something like that.
Well, that's why you take Ozempic at the same time.
Yeah.
Treat addiction and weight loss.
Just you won't crave anything in life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one topic I did want to touch on a little bit is like, what are this, we could probably think about some potential side effects just from lifestyle changes, or maybe put differently, lack of need for lifestyle changes. The benefits to controlling your diet and exercising regularly are beyond that of just physical health. There's like doing hard things is good for people. Learning to do hard things, I think, really makes people feel more capable and thus makes them more capable. So if we've engineered this way for people to not have to do one of the hardest things, which is control their diet and exercise.
Yeah, I think, you're giving something up a little there, but I think if you're someone that's been in the fight for a while, and you haven't seen success, your probability of overcoming that is probably decreasing. Like, let's say I could hop on a drug to fix my knee issue. I'm not gonna take that shit.
Yeah, I hear that.
Like, and I wouldn't feel bad about it. Like, I'd be like, heck yeah, well, I'm better and I'll try and stay better now.
I think,
But I think at some point you start to feel like, I don't know if there's a way.
Yeah.
You get a little lost. So,
totally.
I do think, like, obviously, if you could overcome whatever you've been plagued with for a while, whatever condition it is, you'd feel real great about that. You'd be like, oh, what a victory.
Yeah.
But at some point you're like, I'll take assistance.
For sure. Yeah, I think the case that you're referring to is spot on. I guess my thought is like, for generations future that know that they have this crutch to stand on, as before they're obese, as they're growing up, where it's just like, oh, that's not an issue anymore. There's a drug for that. It works. We can rely on that.
Yeah.
I wonder, Yeah, I don't know. It'll probably be non-measurable effects if I had to guess. I think the people that are really driven are going to be really driven, even if they know they don't need to worry as much about every aspect of being driven in a person's life.
Yeah.
And maybe it's less common to have people who are completely driven to optimize their diet and lifestyle and work output.
Yeah.
As opposed to just focusing on one of those things or two of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's like a safe drug that hits the market that promotes muscle growth and makes you jacked without doing anything. Like,
yeah,
people are gonna hop on that.
Yeah.
Like, and that, it doesn't feel like an impossibility. Like, it feels like science will continue to progress, and we'll create drugs that provide for things that people otherwise probably would have had to work for. As drugs get better and better, side effects probably reduce and reduce.
It's a money issue at that point, right? It's like, I need to get rich if I want to have the body I want. I gotta afford this $1,000 monthly weight loss thing and this $2,000 monthly muscle growth thing. And then if I want to get taller, I need to make an extra $3,000 per month or whatever.
Yeah,
maybe. That's pretty. I think that's pretty fantastical, but not out of the realm of imagination.
Yeah, I think I'm hopeful for the drug. I hope it is safe for the folks that are on it.
Agreed.
And helps them get to a point that they feel stuck in. That would be great. Like, I think it's interesting that, different people have different thoughts. Like, obviously, there's really hasn't been, I don't know, maybe you'll disagree here, but like, how many drugs are out there that like have just provided a net benefit with no real drawback? Like, it just feels like there's always a trade-off.
Or like, or like a lack of choice. Like, I think that the drugs that come to mind, there's very few that have no trade-off. But like, if you're in a cancer situation, there's a drug that addresses that cancer, then it doesn't feel like much of a trade-off. It's just like a necessity. But that's not quite the same thing.
Yeah.
You're
willing to nuke whenever you have to.
Yeah.
And you'll deal with the consequences afterwards.
But this is kind of a new situation where it's like a hugely effective preventative medicine and a hugely effective lifestyle improvement medication. Like, that combination is pretty novel. It's exciting too. I mean, I'm glad it's there. As someone with diabetes in his family, like, I mean, just the baseline like diabetes treatment, I think that's so powerful, and it's going to be really impressive.
Yeah, I'd agree.
We're about at our hour. Is there stuff you wanted to touch on before we sign her off?
I think I've hit most things that I was interested in chatting about. I could leave the crowd with a fun fact.
Yeah, bring it. What do you got?
I learned this morning.
Okay.
Maybe you already know. It's completely off topic, but still science and biology related.
Yeah, bring it.
But it's specific to, maybe it happens for other animals too, but it's specific to crocodiles from what I've read. Did you know that when a crocodile lays eggs, the sex of what comes out of the egg is temperature dependent?
Oh, wow.
Like, if you want to incubate males or you want to incubate females, you can control that.
Wow.
Based on the incubation temperature.
What is going on in nature to select for that?
Right? And, well, actually, there's some pretty good explanations as to why that's the case. And it's also interesting because these guys are the oldest dudes on the planet.
Yeah.
And
it's working.
It feels like climate change is tricky for them, right? Like,
yeah.
The way it works, from what I've read, is there's a window for male, and the really cold or the really hot goes female.
Oh,
There's
okay.
There's a small, like, there's like a 4-degree window for male.
Guys like it just right.
Well, I guess that temperature helps them develop something that, probably their gonads,
Yeah.
that makes them male. But I was like, that is truly fascinating. Like, what a peculiar thing to, like, I didn't expect that would be something that could be possible, like a temperature decisive factor for
Yeah.
for sex.
Yeah, that's a cool one. I like that one. Oh,
Mhm.
man. That's fascinating. Guys like it right in the Goldilocks zone.
Just right, yeah. So who knows? Maybe our crocodile friends will continue to adapt and,
See a lot more ladies.
find a way. Or, yeah, it could be a lady dominant world.
Those
The
lucky,
lads that are born are going to be some lucky crocs.
those lucky few. Gotta be
Yeah.
killing it.
Yeah, I'm curious. Maybe the ratio's skewed a little bit more recently.
Yeah, that's
Don't know what
data.
they
I'd
do
love
for
to
the
see.
next the next pod.
Yeah. Great fun fact.
Yeah.
All right. This has been.
Hark.
I think we're calling this Hark Recording or something like this.
Hark recordings.
Episode 2. GLP1 agonists and weight loss pharmacotherapy.
There you go.
All right.